The first time Samuel O'Connor saw Victoria Orson behind the old weathered barn on the outskirts of Taylorsville, Texas. She was kneeling in the dust with her skirts fanned around her, feeding scraps of salt pork to three mangy dogs that looked like they had not eaten in days. It was early September of 1882, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in shades of amber and gold, making her auburn hair glow like fire where it had escaped from the loose bun at the nape of her neck. Samuel had been riding back from checking fence lines on the western pasture when he noticed movement behind the structure, and curiosity had drawn him closer on his bay mare. He sat perfectly still in the saddle, watching as she murmured soft words to the animals, her voice carrying on the warm breeze like a lullaby. The dogs, skittish and scarred from hard living, gradually crept closer to accept her offerings, their tails beginning tentative wags of gratitude. Something shifted in Samuel's chest at the sight, something he could not quite name but felt as surely as the weight of his rifle in its scabbard. Victoria did not notice him at first, too absorbed in her mission of mercy. She reached into the small basket beside her and pulled out chunks of stale bread, breaking them into smaller pieces. A scraggly orange cat emerged from behind a broken wagon wheel, mewing pitifully, and she turned her attention to the feline with the same gentle patience. Samuel found himself dismounting without conscious thought, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud that finally drew her gaze. Her eyes, he noticed immediately, were the color of sage in springtime, wide and startled as they met his across the distance. "I did not mean to frighten you," Samuel said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had drilled into him since childhood. "I was riding past and saw you here. Thought I should check that everything was all right." Victoria rose gracefully despite the dust on her skirts, brushing her hands together to remove the crumbs. "You did not frighten me much," she replied, though her voice held a slight tremor that suggested otherwise. "I come here most evenings when I can slip away from my duties at the boarding house. These poor creatures have no one else to look after them." Samuel moved closer, leading his horse by the reins. The dogs watched him with wary eyes, but they did not flee, perhaps sensing he meant no harm. "That is mighty kind of you. Most folks in town would not spare a thought for strays. Most folks in town have forgotten what it means to show mercy to the least among us," Victoria said, and there was a fire in her voice that surprised him with its intensity. "These animals did not ask to be abandoned or mistreated. They deserve kindness just as much as any creature God put on this earth." Samuel found himself nodding in agreement, though he could not recall the last time he had given much thought to the welfare of stray animals. His life was consumed with the demands of the ranch he worked on, the endless cycle of cattle drives, fence mending, and breaking horses. There was little room for softness in such an existence, yet here stood this young woman with dirt under her fingernails and compassion in her eyes, making him question what he might have been missing. "I am Samuel O'Connor," he offered, extending his hand. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of here." She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. Her palm was warm and rough with calluses, the hand of someone who knew hard work. "Victoria Orson. I help run the boarding house on Main Street. My aunt owns it, and I have been living with her since I came to Taylorsville 2 years ago." "Well, Miss Orson, it is a pleasure to make your acquaintance." Samuel released her hand, though part of him wanted to hold on longer. "If you do not mind my saying so, it is getting on toward evening. Would you allow me to escort you back to town? These roads are not always safe for a lady alone." Victoria glanced at the animals still clustered around the basket, conflict clear on her face. "I usually stay until they have eaten everything I bring. Some days this might be all they get." "Then I will wait with you," Samuel heard himself say, surprising them both. "If that would be acceptable." A smile transformed her face, driving away the worried crease between her brows. "I would appreciate the company, Mr. O'Connor." "Samuel, please," he said, tying his horse to a fence post and settling himself on an overturned crate nearby. "Mr. O'Connor was my father. God rest his soul." They sat in companionable quiet for several minutes, Victoria continuing her work of distributing food while Samuel watched. The orange cat had grown brave enough to climb into her lap, purring loudly as she stroked its matted fur. One of the dogs, a thin creature with more ribs than meat on its bones, edged closer to Samuel, sniffing at his boots with cautious interest. "You can pet him if you like," Victoria said. "That is Rusty. He is the bravest of the three, though that is not saying much." Samuel extended his hand slowly, letting the dog catch his scent before gently running his fingers over the animal's head. Rusty's tail began to wag more enthusiastically, and something warm unfurled in Samuel's chest. When was the last time he had taken a moment to simply be present with another living thing without purpose or agenda? The ranch kept him so busy that most days blurred together in a haze of exhaustion and duty. "Where did you come from before Taylorsville?" Samuel asked, genuinely curious about this woman who had appeared in his life like an unexpected answer to a question he had not known to ask. Victoria's expression grew distant, her hand stilling on the cat's head. "Missouri originally. My parents ran a small farm outside of Independence. They both passed from fever when I was 16, and I had no other family except my mother's sister here in Texas. Aunt Margaret took me in without hesitation, though I know it was not easy for her. The boarding house barely turns a profit most months." "I am sorry about your parents," Samuel said, and meant it. He knew the particular ache of loss, having buried his own father 3 years prior after a fall from a spooked horse. "Thank you. It has been 4 years now, but some days the missing still feels fresh." Victoria's voice was steady, but Samuel could hear the grief threaded through her words. "What about you? Are you from Texas originally? Born and raised about 20 miles south of here, in a town so small it does not even have a name, just a crossroads with a general store." "My father worked various ranches his whole life, and I followed in his footsteps. My mother remarried after he died, moved to San Antonio with her new husband. I was already 19 and working at the Double R by then, so I stayed put." Victoria nodded, understanding passing between them. They were both people who had known loss, who had learned to build new lives from the scattered pieces of old ones. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of purple and orange, and the air had begun to cool. The animals had finished the food, the dogs settling in the dust with full bellies, the cat still purring in Victoria's lap. "I should get back," Victoria said reluctantly, disturbing the cat to rise. "Aunt Margaret will need help with supper service soon." Samuel stood as well, reclaiming his hat and his horse's reins. "May I ask you something, of course? Might I ride out this way again tomorrow evening, around this same time?" His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for her answer, feeling foolish and young despite his 24 years. Victoria's smile returned, soft and genuine. "I would like that very much, Samuel." They walked back to town together in the fading light, talking of small things and large ones, discovering they shared a love of books despite having little time to read them, that they both preferred coffee to tea, and that they had each felt like outsiders in their own lives until quite recently. Samuel left Victoria at the boarding house steps, tipping his hat and promising to return the following evening. As he rode back toward the ranch, the stars beginning to emerge overhead, he could not stop the smile that spread across his face. The next day dragged interminably for Samuel. He went about his duties with his usual competence, but his mind kept wandering to auburn hair and sage-green eyes, to the image of Victoria kneeling in the dust, showing mercy to creatures others had forgotten. The other ranch hands noticed his distraction and ribbed him good-naturedly, but Samuel deflected their questions with practiced ease. Whatever was growing between him and Victoria felt too new, too fragile to withstand scrutiny. When evening finally arrived, Samuel made excuses about checking on a fence section that did not truly need checking and rode hard for the barn on the edge of town. Victoria was already there, her basket once again full of scraps. The animals greeted her like an old friend, and Samuel felt absurdly pleased to see that Rusty remembered him as well, trotting over for attention. "You came," Victoria said, and was that relief in her voice? "I said I would," Samuel replied, settling beside her on the ground this time, propriety be damned. "Did you think I would not?" "I have learned not to place too much faith in promises," Victoria admitted. "People mean well, but life has a way of interfering with intentions." "I understand that," Samuel said, "but I try to be a man of my word. If I say I will be somewhere, I will be there unless circumstance truly prevents it." They fell into an easy rhythm, Samuel helping to distribute the food while Victoria told him about her day. A difficult guest at the boarding house had complained about everything from the temperature of the water for his bath to the seasoning in the stew. A traveling salesman had tried to sell her aunt a set of encyclopedias they could not afford and did not need. A child had fallen in the street and scraped his knee, and Victoria had helped clean and bandage the wound. "You seem to make a habit of caring for those in need," Samuel observed. Victoria shrugged, breaking apart a biscuit for the orange cat. "I suppose I do. My mother was that way. She never could pass someone struggling without stopping to help. I like to think it is one of the better traits she passed to me." "It is a fine trait," Samuel assured her. "The world could use more folks like you." They stayed longer that evening, reluctant to part. Samuel told her about the Double R Ranch, about the cantankerous foreman who barked orders like a military commander but had a secret soft spot for the barn cats. He described the vastness of the Texas plains, the way thunder rolled across the sky before a storm, the satisfaction of a hard day's work completed. Victoria listened with rapt attention, asking questions that showed genuine interest. When they finally walked back to town, Samuel's hand brushed against Victoria's, and he seized his courage to take it properly. She did not pull away, instead lacing her fingers through his. They did not speak, letting the contact say what words could not yet express. This pattern continued for 2 weeks. Every evening that Samuel could manage, he rode to the barn to meet Victoria. They fed the strays together, talked about everything and nothing, and gradually learned the shape of each other's hearts. Samuel discovered that Victoria had a sharp wit and a quiet strength that belied her gentle demeanor. She had opinions on politics and literature, dreams of one day having a home of her own with a garden where she could grow vegetables and flowers. Victoria learned that Samuel was patient and thoughtful, that he read poetry when he could not sleep, that he had once wanted to be a schoolteacher, but circumstance had directed him toward ranch work instead. The animals grew healthier under Victoria's consistent care. Rusty filled out, his ribs no longer quite so prominent. The orange cat, which Victoria had named Marmalade, had lost some of its matted fur and now looked almost dignified. The other 2 dogs, Patch and Sally, were less fearful, accepting attention from both Victoria and Samuel with something approaching trust. On the 15th evening, Samuel brought something extra in his saddlebag. When they had finished feeding the animals, He pulled out a small book bound in worn leather. "I thought you might like this," he said, suddenly nervous. "It is a collection of poems by Walt Whitman. Nothing fancy, but you mentioned liking poetry." Victoria took the book with reverent hands, opening it carefully. "Oh, Samuel, this is wonderful, but I cannot accept this. Books are expensive." "It was my father's," Samuel explained. "He would have wanted it to go to someone who would appreciate it. Please, I want you to have it." Tears shimmered in Victoria's eyes as she clutched the book to her chest. "Thank you. I will treasure it." Samuel reached out and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. The gesture was intimate, more than they had shared before, and Victoria's breath caught. They were close enough that Samuel could count the freckles scattered across her nose, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin in the cooling evening air. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we have not known each other long, but I find myself thinking about you constantly. You have become the best part of my days." "Samuel," she whispered, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest, surely feeling the frantic beating of his heart. "I feel the same." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that sent electricity singing through his veins. Victoria responded, the book of poetry falling forgotten to the ground as her arms came up around his neck. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing pouring between them until they broke apart gasping. "I am completely in love with you," Samuel said, because there was no point in pretending otherwise. "I know it is fast and may be foolish, but it is true nonetheless." "It is not foolish," Victoria replied, her eyes shining. "I love you too. I think I started falling that first day when you stayed with me instead of riding away like most men would have done." They held each other as the stars emerged overhead, making quiet promises and plans. Samuel wanted to do this properly, wanted to court Victoria the right way and ask for her hand when the time was appropriate. Victoria wanted that too, wanted the future they could build together. But reality intruded as it always does. When Samuel finally walked Victoria back to the boarding house, they found it in an uproar. Her Aunt Margaret stood on the porch, wringing her hands, her face creased with worry. "Victoria, thank the Lord," she cried when she spotted her niece. "I was about to send someone to look for you." "What has happened?" Victoria asked, alarm sharpening her voice. "The boarding house. We have been served notice that the bank is foreclosing. We have 30 days to come up with the money we owe or we will lose everything." Margaret's voice broke on the last word. Victoria's face went pale in the lamplight. "How much do we owe?" $300. "I fell behind on payments after that bout of illness last winter when we lost income. I thought I could catch up, but—" Margaret trailed off helplessly. $300 might as well have been 3,000 for people like them. Samuel's mind raced, calculating his own meager savings accumulated over years of ranch work. He had perhaps $60 saved, nowhere near enough. "There has to be something we can do," Victoria said, her voice steady despite the shock. "We will figure something out." Samuel squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he would help however he could. But as he rode back to the ranch that night, worry gnawed at his gut. $300 in 30 days. It seemed an impossible task. The next morning, Samuel approached the ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Tom Henderson who had worked cattle since before Samuel was born. "Tom, I need to ask you something," Samuel said, hat in hand. "Spit it out, boy." "Is there any way I could get an advance on my wages? Or extra work I could take on for additional pay?" Tom studied him with sharp eyes. "This about that girl you have been sneaking off to see?" Samuel felt heat rise in his cheeks but held Tom's gaze. "Yes, sir. Her family is in trouble and I want to help." "How much trouble we talking?" $300 worth. Tom let out a low whistle. "That is substantial. I can give you some extra work, but it will not amount to that kind of money in the time I suspect you need it. The ranch does not have that kind of ready cash to advance anyhow. Disappointment settled heavy in Samuel's chest, but he nodded. I understand. Thank you anyway. Hold on, Tom said. There might be another option. You know that wild stallion that has been running the canyons north of here? The black one with the white blaze. Samuel knew the horse by reputation. Every rancher and cowboy in the area had taken a crack at catching the legendary stallion, and all had failed. The horse was smart, fast, and seemed to vanish like smoke whenever anyone got close. What about him? Old man Jacobson over in the next county has offered a $200 reward to anyone who can catch that stallion and break him. His daughter is getting married, and he wants to give the horse as a wedding gift. Been offering that reward for near on 6 months now with no takers who could deliver. $200 would not solve the whole problem, but it would make a significant dent. You think I could do it? You are the best horseman I've got on this ranch, Tom said. If anyone has a shot, it is you, but it is dangerous work. That stallion is not called the demon for nothing. I have to try, Samuel said. Tom nodded slowly. I will give you a week. Take whatever supplies you need from the ranch and I will cover for your regular duties. But after a week, you are back here working or you are out of a job. Understood? Understood. Thank you, Tom. Samuel spent the rest of the day gathering supplies and making preparations. That evening he rode to meet Victoria and explained his plan. She listened with growing alarm. Samuel, no. It is too dangerous. That horse has hurt people who tried to catch him. I know the risks, Samuel said, taking her hands. But Victoria, I have to do something. I cannot stand by and watch you lose your home without even trying to help. We will find another way. We can take in more boarders or I can find additional work. In 30 days, Victoria, be realistic. This is our best chance. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded reluctantly. Promise me you will be careful. I promise, Samuel said, pulling her into his arms. I will catch that horse, collect the reward, and be back before you know it. They kissed goodbye under the stars, neither wanting to let go but knowing they must. Samuel mounted his horse and rode north toward the canyons, determination settling over him like armor. The wild country north of Taylorsville was harsh and beautiful, all red rock formations and scrub brush, cut through with dry creek beds that only ran after heavy rains. Samuel made camp in a sheltered spot with a good view of the surrounding area and began his hunt. For 3 days, he tracked the stallion through the canyons, learning the horse's patterns and preferred routes. The demon was magnificent, easily 16 hands high with a coat like polished obsidian and intelligent eyes that seemed to mock Samuel's efforts. The horse moved like liquid shadow, here one moment and gone the next. On the 4th day, Samuel found a narrow canyon with only one exit and managed to herd the stallion into it. For hours they played a dangerous game, the horse trying to break past Samuel while Samuel held his position, turning the stallion back each time. His own mare was exhausted, foam flecking her chest, but Samuel could see the wild horse tiring as well. Finally, as the sun began to set, Samuel managed to get a rope on the stallion. The horse fought like a creature possessed, rearing and bucking, nearly trampling Samuel twice. But Samuel held on with every ounce of strength he possessed, talking in a low, steady voice, using every trick his father had taught him about handling difficult horses. It took another full day, but gradually the stallion began to settle. Samuel approached the breaking carefully with patience rather than force. He let the horse wear himself out, then would advance, retreat, advance again. He touched the stallion's neck, withdrew, touched again. Slowly, incrementally, Trust began to build where there had been only fear and fury. By the 6th day, Samuel had a saddle on the horse. By the 7th, he rode the stallion out of the canyons, both of them exhausted but triumphant. The horse still had spirit, still tossed his head and danced, but he responded to Samuel's commands. He was not fully broken and perhaps never would be entirely, but he was rideable. Samuel headed directly for the Jacobson ranch, arriving dusty and bone-tired but leading the black stallion. Old man Jacobson met him at the gate, his eyes widening with disbelief. "I will be damned," the rancher breathed. "You actually caught the demon." "Is your offer still good?" Samuel asked, his voice hoarse from days of minimal water. "It is indeed, young man. Come in, get cleaned up, and I will have my foreman count out your money. My daughter is going to be thrilled beyond measure." 2 hours later, Samuel rode away with $200 in his pocket, feeling like the richest man in Texas despite his exhaustion. He pushed hard for Taylorsville, arriving late that evening and heading straight for the boarding house. Victoria answered his knock, gasping at the sight of him. "Samuel, you look terrible. Come in, come in." "I caught him," Samuel said, grinning despite his fatigue. "I caught the demon and collected the reward." He pulled the money from his pocket and pressed it into her hands. Victoria stared at the bills as though they might vanish like smoke. "Samuel, this is incredible, but it is not enough. We still need another $100. "I know, but it is a start, and I have been thinking. What if we held a barn dance? We could charge admission, sell food and refreshments. If we can get enough folks to turn out, we might raise the rest." Victoria's face lit with hope. "That could work. There has not been a proper dance in Taylorsville in months. People would probably welcome the entertainment." Over the next 2 weeks, Victoria, Samuel, and Margaret threw themselves into organizing the event. Samuel spread word throughout the surrounding ranches, while Victoria handled publicity in town. They secured the use of a large barn on the edge of town, recruited musicians, and organized donations of food and supplies from local merchants who wanted to help. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, perfect weather for a celebration. Lanterns hung from the rafters of the barn, casting warm light over the swept floor. A fiddle, guitar, and harmonica provided music that got feet tapping the moment people arrived. Samuel had never seen so many folks in one place, ranchers and cowboys and town dwellers all mixed together. Victoria looked beautiful in a dress of deep blue that Margaret had helped her alter from an old gown. Samuel claimed the first dance, sweeping her across the floor while she laughed with pure joy. Between dances, they worked the crowd, thanking people for coming and gently encouraging purchases of the baked goods and refreshments laid out on tables. As the evening wore on, Samuel kept a running tally of their intake. They were getting close, tantalizingly close, but not quite at the $100 they needed. His anxiety must have shown on his face because Victoria squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we tried our best," she said. "That counts for something." But Samuel wanted more than just trying. He wanted to succeed, to save the boarding house, to give Victoria and her aunt security. An idea struck him, risky but potentially worthwhile. "Folks," Samuel called out, waiting for the music to stop and attention to turn his way. "I want to thank every single one of you for coming tonight and supporting a good family in need. Now, I know most of you have heard about the wild stallion called the Demon that has been running these parts. Well, I am the one who caught and broke him, and old man Jacobson paid me handsomely for the privilege. But I have been thinking, that horse deserves an owner who will appreciate him, someone who understands that spirit is not the same as meanness." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Samuel continued, "So I am proposing an auction. I bought that stallion back from Jacobson for a fair price, and now I am offering him to the highest bidder with all proceeds going towards saving the boarding house. Do I have any takers?" Silence fell, and for a horrible moment Samuel thought he had miscalculated. Then a voice from the back called out, $50. 75, another voice countered. The bidding war was on. Ranchers who had dreamed of owning the legendary demon competed fiercely, driving the price higher and higher. Samuel's heart pounded as the numbers climbed. $100, $125, $150. $175, called out Marcus Ward, owner of the biggest spread in the county. "And that is my final offer." Samuel looked around, but no one else spoke up. Going once, going twice, sold to Marcus Ward for $175. Cheers erupted. Victoria had her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Margaret was openly weeping. Samuel felt dizzy with relief as Marcus came forward to shake his hand and hand over the money. "That was a fine piece of horsemanship, son," Marcus said, "and a finer piece of generosity. You ever get tired of working for the Double R, you come see me. I could use a man like you." "Thank you, sir. I will keep that in mind." When they counted the full take from the evening, they had raised $192, more than enough to cover what they still owed. Victoria hugged Samuel so tightly he could barely breathe, and he did not care one bit. The next morning, they went to the bank together and paid off the debt in full. The banker, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, marked the account as satisfied and handed Margaret the deed to the boarding house. "You folks are all set," he said. "Though I have to say, I am impressed. Raising that kind of money in such a short time is no small feat." Outside the bank, Margaret turned to Samuel with tears in her eyes. "Young man, I do not know how to properly thank you for what you have done for us." "You do not need to thank me, madam," Samuel said. "I care deeply for your niece, and I could not stand by and do nothing." Margaret looked between Samuel and Victoria, seeing clearly what had developed between them. "I believe we should have a serious conversation, the three of us. Would you come by for supper tonight?" "I would be honored," Samuel replied. That evening, over a meal of roasted chicken and potatoes, Margaret asked Samuel about his intentions regarding Victoria. Samuel, who had been expecting this question, answered honestly, "Madam, I know I am just a ranch hand without much to my name beyond my horse and my savings. But I love your niece with everything I have. I want to marry her if she will have me and if you give your blessing. I promise to work hard and provide for her, to treat her with respect and kindness all the days of my life." Margaret studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Victoria is all the family I have left. She is precious to me beyond measure." "She is precious to me as well," Samuel said. Margaret looked at her niece. "What do you say, Victoria? Is this what you want?" Victoria reached across the table to take Samuel's hand. "It is." "I love Samuel, Aunt Margaret. He is a good man, and I want to build a life with him." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing, but I expect you to take proper time for a courtship. No rushing off to get married tomorrow." "Of course," Samuel agreed. "I want to do this right." Over the following months, Samuel courted Victoria with old-fashioned propriety. He took her to church socials and town festivals. They went on chaperoned picnics and long walks. Every evening when Samuel could manage, they still met at the barn behind town to feed the strays, which had become their special tradition. The animals thrived under Victoria's continued care. Rusty had become a friendly dog who greeted Samuel with enthusiastic tail wags. Marmalade the cat was sleek and healthy, often riding in the basket on Victoria's arm. Even Patch and Sally had lost most of their fear, though they remained more reserved than Rusty. Samuel saved every penny he could, planning for their future. He spoke with Tom Henderson about long-term prospects at the ranch, and also followed up with Marcus Ward about potential opportunities. Both men respected Samuel's work ethic and skill, and Marcus made him a concrete offer of a foreman position at higher wages if Samuel wanted it. "You should take it," Victoria told him when he shared the news. "It is a wonderful opportunity. It would mean longer hours, at least at first. I would have less time to spend with you. We have our whole lives to spend together," Victoria said, practical as always. "Right now, you need to think about building a foundation for our future." Samuel accepted the position, starting in January of 1883. The work was demanding, but he threw himself into it with characteristic determination. Marcus Ward turned out to be a fair and generous employer, and Samuel proved his worth quickly. By spring, Samuel had saved enough to purchase a small piece of land not far from town. It was not much, just 20 acres with a creek running through it and a stand of old oak trees, but it had potential. He immediately began making plans to build a house. On a warm evening in May, Samuel took Victoria to see the property. They walked the land hand in hand while he described his vision for their future home. A simple but sturdy house with a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings. A garden plot for Victoria's vegetables and flowers. A barn for horses and maybe a milk cow. Room to grow as their family grew. When they reached the highest point on the property, with a view of the rolling Texas plains stretching to the horizon, Samuel stopped walking. He turned to face Victoria, his heart hammering with nervousness despite knowing what her answer would be. "Victoria Orson, I have loved you since the day I saw you feeding strays behind that old barn. Your kindness, your strength, your generous heart, these things made me fall completely. I know I am not a wealthy man, and I never will be. But I promise to love you with everything I am, to work hard for our future, to be faithful and true until my last breath. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, purchased with wages carefully hoarded. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you more than I have words to express." He slid the ring onto her finger, and they sealed the engagement with a kiss that felt like a promise and a beginning all at once. They were married on a bright Saturday in September, exactly 1 year after they had first met. The ceremony took place in the small church in Taylorsville, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Victoria wore a dress of ivory lace that Margaret had worked on for months, and Samuel wore his best suit, his hair slicked down and his boots polished to a shine. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the journey they were embarking upon together. When it came time for Samuel to recite his vows, his voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Victoria, you taught me that strength comes in many forms, that kindness is never weakness, that love can grow in the most unexpected places. I promise to honor you, to cherish you, to stand by your side through whatever life brings. You are my heart, my home, my future. I am yours, now and always." Victoria's vows were equally heartfelt, speaking of how Samuel had shown her that trust could be rebuilt, that taking chances on love was worth the risk, that true partnership meant supporting each other's dreams. There was not a dry eye in the church by the time they were pronounced husband and wife. The reception was held in the same barn where they had held the fundraising dance. This time, the celebration was pure joy with no shadow of worry hanging over it. They danced and laughed and accepted congratulations from what felt like every person they had ever met. Even the strays made an appearance, with Rusty begging scraps from guests and Marmalade watching proceedings from a safe perch in the rafters. As evening turned to night, Samuel and Victoria slipped away to their new house. It was not finished yet, still rough in places, but the bedroom was complete and furnished. Samuel carried Victoria over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and set her down gently. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Connor," he said. "It is perfect," Victoria replied, looking around at the simple room that represented so much hard work and hope. They came together in the privacy of their new bedroom, expressing physically what they felt in their hearts. Samuel was gentle and patient, mindful that this was new territory for both of them. Victoria responded with trust and passion, and they discovered together the deep intimacy that marriage could bring. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. The months that followed were among the happiest of Samuel's life. He threw himself into his work as foreman, earning respect from the men he supervised and praise from Marcus Ward. Victoria divided her time between helping her aunt at the boarding house and making their house into a true home. She planted her garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the Texas soil. She sewed curtains for the windows and braided rugs for the floors. She made friends among the ranch wives, finding community in a way she had not quite managed before. They still took time most evenings to feed the strays, though the collection of animals had changed. Rusty had become such a fixture at their house that he essentially lived there now, sleeping on the porch and following Samuel around like a devoted shadow. Marmalade had similarly claimed Victoria as her person, often sitting in her lap while she worked on mending. New strays appeared periodically, and Victoria cared for them all with the same compassion she had shown that first evening. Word of Victoria's kindness to animals spread, and people began bringing injured or abandoned creatures to her. A kitten with a broken leg, a dog that had been hit by a wagon, a baby bird fallen from its nest. Victoria nursed them all back to health with infinite patience, and Samuel built cages and pens to house them during recovery. "We are going to need a bigger property at this rate," Samuel joked one evening, watching Victoria feed milk to an orphaned calf using a rag soaked in the liquid. "Would that be so terrible?" Victoria asked, glancing up at him with a smile. "Not terrible at all," Samuel assured her. "Just an observation." By the summer of 1884, Samuel had been promoted again and was earning wages that seemed princely compared to his old ranch hand salary. He and Victoria discussed expanding their property, potentially purchasing the adjacent 20 acres that had come up for sale. They could afford it now, with careful management, and the extra land would allow them to raise some cattle of their own. But other news soon overshadowed property discussions. In August, Victoria came to Samuel with tears in her eyes and a trembling smile on her lips. "I am with child," she said simply. Samuel's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly. The doctor confirmed it today. He thinks the baby will come in early spring." They held each other for a long moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of this new development. A child. They were going to be parents. The responsibility felt enormous, but so did the joy. "Are you happy?" Victoria asked, pulling back to study his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel replied. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful beyond measure. We are going to have a family, Victoria." The pregnancy was not easy. Victoria suffered from sickness in the early months that left her weak and pale. Samuel worried constantly, but Victoria reassured him that the doctor said everything was progressing normally. She continued her work at the boarding house until she became too uncomfortable, and even then she kept busy with projects around their home. Samuel, meanwhile, threw himself into preparations. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as glass. He reinforced the roof and chinked gaps in the walls, wanting everything perfect for when the baby arrived. He purchased supplies they would need and set aside money for the doctor's fee. In March of 1885, on a night when spring storms rolled across the plains, Victoria's labor began. Samuel sent for the doctor and for Margaret, then paced the main room of their house like a caged animal while the women worked in the bedroom. The hours crawled past, each of Victoria's cries of pain like a knife to his heart. Finally, just as dawn broke gray and rainy over the land, a new sound pierced the air. The thin, outraged wail of a newborn. Samuel froze, hardly daring to breathe until Margaret appeared in the doorway with a smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy baby boy. Come meet your son." Samuel entered the bedroom on shaky legs. Victoria lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes was almost too much to bear. "Samuel, meet your son," she said softly. Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face just visible in the blankets. The baby had stopped crying and was staring up with unfocused eyes, one small fist waving near his mouth. He was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered, afraid to speak too loudly. "You are beautiful. You did this incredible thing." "We did this," Victoria corrected. "We made him together." They named the baby James William O'Connor after both of their fathers. James was a hungry, vocal baby who kept them up at all hours, but neither Samuel nor Victoria minded. They were too enchanted with every small sound and movement, too amazed that they had created this perfect little person. The community rallied around the new family with support and gifts. Margaret helped with the baby so Victoria could rest. The ranch wives brought food and supplies. Marcus Ward gave Samuel time off to help Victoria recover and adjust to new parenthood. As James grew from newborn to infant to toddler, Samuel watched Victoria bloom into motherhood. She was patient and loving, singing lullabies and telling stories, teaching James about kindness and compassion from his earliest days. When James was old enough to toddle around, he followed his mother as she fed the animals, learning to be gentle with the strays that still appeared regularly. Samuel's own relationship with his son was marked by quiet joy. He would hold James on his lap in the evenings, reading aloud from books even though the boy was too young to understand. He taught James to recognize horses and cattle, to appreciate the beauty of the land. As James began to talk, his first clear word was "Papa," and Samuel felt his heart might burst from happiness. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samuel continued to excel in his work, and by 1888 he was widely respected as one of the best foremen in the county. He and Victoria had purchased the additional acreage, and now ran a modest but successful cattle operation alongside Samuel's regular job. The house had been expanded with 2 additional rooms, though the second remained empty for now. Victoria had become known throughout the area as the woman to seek if an animal needed help. She had successfully treated everything from sick horses to injured hawks, earning a reputation for having a healing touch. People offered to pay her, but she refused money, accepting only donations of food or supplies for future cases. On an evening in late summer, Samuel came home to find Victoria in the garden, James playing nearby with Rusty. She turned as Samuel approached, and he saw immediately that she had news written across her face. "I am with child again," she said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Another baby, Samuel. Joy flooded through him, and he gathered both Victoria and James into his arms. "This is wonderful news. James is going to be a big brother." The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and in April of 1889, Victoria gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose Margaret O'Connor, after her grandmother and the flowers Victoria loved so dearly. Rose was a quieter baby than James had been, with her mother's auburn hair and her father's serious dark eyes. James, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to help with everything, fetching blankets and making silly faces to elicit her rare smiles. Samuel watched his son's gentle handling of the infant and felt profound gratitude that they were teaching him the values that mattered most. The years flowed past, marked by the rhythm of ranching and family life. James grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses. Rose was quieter but equally determined, with a fierce love for all living things that rivaled her mother's. In 1892, Victoria gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas Edward after the Reverend who had married them and Samuel's old foreman who had passed away the previous year. The house expanded again to accommodate their growing family. The cattle operation flourished. Samuel's reputation grew to the point that he received job offers from all over Texas, but he always declined. Everything he needed was right here in Taylorsville, in this house he had built, with this woman he loved beyond measure, and the family they had created together. In 1895, on a September evening that felt like an echo of that first meeting 13 years prior, Samuel found Victoria behind their barn, feeding scraps to the current collection of strays. Their 3 children played nearby, James now 10 and helping his mother, Rose at 6 solemnly petting a one-eyed cat, Thomas at 3 trying to catch grasshoppers in the grass. Samuel leaned against the fence and watched, his heart full to overflowing. This woman who had captured his soul with a simple act of kindness. These children who brought more joy than he had imagined possible. This life they had built from hope and hard work and love. Victoria looked up and caught him watching. "What are you thinking about?" she called. "Just remembering the first time I saw you doing exactly this," Samuel replied, moving closer. "Feeding strays, showing mercy to creatures that nobody else cared about." "That feels like a lifetime ago," Victoria said. "It was a lifetime ago. The life before this one, before you became my wife and gave me this family." Victoria set down her basket and came to him, despite their children watching with interest. She wound her arms around his neck, and he held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of soap and sunshine and home. "I love you," she said against his chest. "Every day I love you more than the day before." "I love you too," Samuel replied. "Falling in love with you was the best thing I ever did." "Papa, Mama, can we go down to the creek?" James called out. Samuel and Victoria broke apart, smiling at their impatient son. "Yes, but watch your brother and sister," Samuel instructed. They watched the children run off, Rusty bounding after them with the enthusiasm of a much younger dog. The old boy was getting gray around the muzzle now, but he still had plenty of life in him. "Can you believe we built all of this?" Victoria mused, gesturing at the house, the barn, the prosperous land around them. "Sometimes it feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I hope I never wake up," Samuel said. They walked hand in hand toward the house as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson. Inside, they would prepare dinner and gather the children and share the meal around the table Samuel had built with his own hands. They would read stories and tuck little ones into bed and steal quiet moments together in the peaceful evening. Later that night, lying in bed with Victoria nestled against his side, Samuel reflected on the journey that had brought them to this place. From that first glimpse of a woman showing kindness to forgotten creatures, through challenges and triumphs, building a life together one day at a time. She had taught him that the greatest strength was gentleness, that love could transform everything, that a good heart was worth more than all the gold in California. "What are you thinking about so hard?" Victoria murmured sleepily. "I can hear your mind working." "Just being grateful," Samuel replied. "For you, for our children, for this life we have." "Me too," Victoria said. "Every single day, me too." The years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to their story. James grew into a fine young man, as skilled with horses as his father and as compassionate as his mother. He went to work on Marcus Ward's ranch at 16, proving himself capable and responsible. Rose inherited her mother's healing touch with animals and began assisting Victoria with the strays, showing remarkable skill for one so young. Thomas was still finding his way, but he had his father's steady temperament and his mother's kind heart. In 1897, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72. The boarding house was sold, as Margaret had left it to Victoria in her will, along with a small sum of money. Victoria grieved deeply for the aunt who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. But she took comfort in knowing Margaret had lived to see her niece happy and settled with a loving family. The money from the boarding house sale allowed Samuel and Victoria to purchase even more land, expanding their operation significantly. They hired hands to help with the work, and the O'Connor Ranch became one of the more successful operations in the area, known for quality cattle and exceptional horses. Samuel, now in his late 30s, had silver threading through his dark hair and lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the Texas sun. But he was still strong and capable, still commanding respect from everyone who knew him. Victoria had retained her beauty, though motherhood and years of hard work had added their own marks. The auburn hair was touched with gray now, and she had laugh lines that had not been there in her youth. To Samuel, she was more beautiful than ever. In 1899, as the century drew to a close, James announced his engagement to a young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. The wedding was planned for spring of 1900, and the entire family threw themselves into preparations with enthusiasm. The wedding was a joyous affair, held at the O'Connor Ranch with half the county in attendance. Samuel walked the bride down the aisle alongside her father, as James had asked him to share the honor. Watching his eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Samuel found himself thinking back to his own wedding day, to the promises he and Victoria had made. 22 years later, those promises had been kept. Through good times and hard times, through 3 children and countless challenges, through the daily grind and the moments of transcendent joy, they had remained true to each other. Their love had not diminished with time but had grown deeper, richer, more essential. After the ceremony, Samuel found Victoria standing apart from the celebration, watching the newlyweds dance. He came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Our boy is all grown up," he said. "He is," Victoria agreed. "It seems impossible, but here we are. You remember our wedding day, every detail, do you? Every single moment. You were so beautiful I could hardly breathe. You still are." Victoria turned in his arms to face him. "We have had a good life together, have we not?" "The very best," Samuel confirmed. "And we have years ahead of us still. This story is not over yet." They danced together as the stars emerged overhead, surrounded by family and friends and community. The ranch that had started as 20 acres and a dream now sprawled across substantial acreage, prosperous and thriving. The house Samuel had built with his own hands had sheltered 3 children and would soon welcome grandchildren. The woman he had seen feeding strays behind a barn was his wife, his partner, his everything. In the years that followed, the new century brought changes. James and Sarah had their first child, a son, in 1901, making Samuel and Victoria grandparents for the first time. The experience of holding his grandson, seeing his own features reflected in another generation, moved Samuel in ways he had not anticipated. Victoria was a doting grandmother, always ready to watch the baby and spoil him with attention. Rose showed no interest in marriage, preferring to focus on her work with animals. She had built a reputation as a healer, and people traveled from miles around seeking her help with sick or injured creatures. Samuel and Victoria supported her choices, recognizing that not every woman needed marriage to find fulfillment. Rose was happy, and that was what mattered. Thomas, always the quietest of their children, surprised everyone by announcing at 18 that he wanted to study law. He had been corresponding with a lawyer in Dallas who had agreed to take him on as an apprentice. It would mean leaving the ranch, leaving Texas for a time, but Samuel and Victoria encouraged him to pursue his dreams. "We built this ranch and this life so our children could have opportunities," Victoria said as they prepared to send Thomas off. "If his opportunity is in Dallas studying law, then that is where he should be." Samuel agreed, though he would miss his youngest son terribly. But he was proud beyond measure that Thomas had ambitions beyond ranching, that he wanted to make a difference in the world through law and justice. By 1905, Samuel and Victoria were in their mid-40s, considered old by frontier standards but still vigorous and active. The ranch employed a dozen hands now, and Samuel had hired a younger man to take over some of the more physically demanding aspects of the foreman duties. He and Victoria had more time to spend together, and they treasured those quiet moments. They still fed the strays together most evenings, though Rusty had passed away years ago, along with most of the original animals from those early days. New creatures always appeared to take their place, and Victoria welcomed each one with the same compassion that had first caught Samuel's attention all those years ago. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of purple and gold, Victoria leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder. "If you could go back and change anything, would you?" she asked. Samuel considered the question seriously. Their life had not always been easy. There had been hard years, crop failures, cattle disease, injuries, and illnesses. They had known grief and loss alongside the joy. But would he change any of it? "No," he said finally. "Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to each other and to this life. I would not change a single thing." "Neither would I," Victoria agreed, "though I would like to know what the future holds." "More of this, I hope," Samuel said. "More years together, watching our children and grandchildren grow, tending this land, loving each other." "That sounds perfect to me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, still holding hands as they had since that first walk back to town decades ago. The ranch was quiet around them, the day's work done, the animals settled for the night. Inside the house, lamps glowed warm and welcoming. This was home, built on a foundation of kindness and love, stronger than anything Samuel could have imagined that evening when he first saw Victoria feeding strays behind a barn. The years ahead would bring more changes, more challenges and triumphs. James and Sarah would have 3 more children. Rose would marry after all, late and unexpected but deeply happy, to a veterinarian who shared her passion for animals. Thomas would become a successful lawyer and return to Texas to practice, making a name for himself defending those who could not afford proper representation. Samuel and Victoria would become old together, their hair turning white, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They would celebrate 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, the ranch they built still thriving under James's management. But on this evening in 1905, with the sunset fading and the stars emerging, they were simply Samuel and Victoria, a cowboy and the kind-hearted woman who had captured his soul completely with a simple act of mercy. They had built something lasting from that chance meeting, something that would echo through generations. "I love you," Samuel said, as he had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "I love you too," Victoria replied, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. They rose together and went inside their home, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it side by side as they always had. The barn behind the house stood dark and empty now, but it remained a monument to where their story began. A cowboy seeing a woman feed strays and recognizing in that moment of kindness something precious and rare. Love at first sight, though Samuel had not known to call it that until much later. Their story was one of the thousands played out across the Texas plains in those years, men and women building lives from nothing, creating futures from hope and determination. But to Samuel and Victoria, it was the only story that mattered, the one they had written together with their choices and their commitment and their love. As they settled into bed that night, Samuel pulled Victoria close, feeling her warmth and the steady beat of her heart. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Inside, all was warm and safe and home. This was their legacy, not just the land or the ranch or the children, but this enduring love that had started with kindness and grown into something unshakable. They had chosen each other and continued choosing each other every day for decades, building a partnership that had weathered every storm. In the morning, they would rise and begin another day, feeding animals and working the ranch and living the life they had built together. There would be grandchildren to spoil and business to attend to and endless small tasks that made up their days. But always, underneath everything else, there would be this love, steady and true, the foundation upon which everything else rested. Samuel drifted toward sleep with Victoria in his arms, grateful beyond words for that September evening in 1882, when he had ridden past an old barn and seen a woman showing mercy to creatures others had forgotten. It had changed everything, that moment. It had given him the greatest gift of his life, this woman, this love, this future they had claimed together. And as sleep claimed him, Samuel's last thought was simple and profound. He was home, truly home, in a way that had nothing to do with buildings or land and everything to do with the woman sleeping peacefully beside him. This was what mattered. This was what lasted. This was love, enduring and complete. The story of Samuel and Victoria O'Connor became one told around fires and dinner tables for generations. The cowboy and the woman feeding strays. A reminder that the greatest things often begin with the simplest acts of kindness, and that true love, once found, could withstand anything time might bring.